My mother stood in front of a judge and swore I was mentally unfit to make my own medical decisions. She did this while I was sitting 3 rows behind her, holding the very paperwork that proved she was lying. My father didn't even show up. He sent a notarized letter instead, calling me emotionally volatile and a danger to myself. My name is Elise, and for 26 years I believed I was the broken one. That was the design. What happens when the people who raised you never wanted a daughter, they wanted a spare parts kit? And the moment you stop being useful, they try to erase you from existence. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the morning everything cracked open. It was a Tuesday in late October when my phone rang at 6:14 a.m. I remember the time because I had just poured coffee into a mug that still had yesterday's coffee in it, and I was standing in my kitchen in Charlotte, North Carolina, trying to decide if that was disgusting or efficient. The caller ID said Mom. That alone was unusual. My mother didn't call. She summoned. She texted addresses, times, expectations. A phone call meant someone was either dead or about to need something from me. I picked up on the 4th ring. Your brother is sick, she said. No hello. No warmth. Just the headline. I set the mug down. What kind of sick? His kidneys, she said. Both of them. He needs a transplant. And you need to come home. Home. She said that word like it still applied. Like the house in Asheville where I grew up still had a room with my name on it. It didn't. They turned it into a home gym the month after I left for college. I asked what hospital. She told me Mission Health downtown. I asked how long he'd been sick. She paused. That pause told me everything. He'd been sick for a while. They just hadn't told me until they needed something. I drove to Asheville that afternoon. 2.5 hours on I-40, mostly in silence. No music, no podcast, just the hum of the road and the slow weight of what I already suspected. They weren't calling because they missed me. They were calling because I was O-negative, universal donor. I'd known my blood type since I was 12 because my mother had made me memorize it. At the time, I thought it was a safety thing. Now I understood it was inventory management. When I arrived at the hospital, my mother was already in the lobby, arms crossed, dressed like she was attending a board meeting, navy blazer, pearl earrings. She looked at me the way she always did, like I was slightly late to something I should have been early for. You look tired, she said. I just drove 3 hours. She didn't respond to that. She turned and walked toward the elevator, expecting me to follow. I did. Not because I was obedient, but because I wanted to see my brother. Whatever else was true about my family, I still cared about him. That was the leash they never had to tighten. They knew I loved him, and they used it like a crowbar. My brother, Caleb, was 23, 3 years younger than me. He'd been the golden child since birth, not because he was cruel, but because he was theirs in a way I apparently was not. I didn't know that yet. Not consciously. But the difference had always been there, humming beneath every holiday, every family photo, every offhand comment my father made about how Caleb had his mother's eyes, while I had, well, they never finished that sentence. Caleb's room was on the 4th floor. When I walked in, he was sitting up in bed, watching something on his phone with earbuds in. He looked pale, thinner than the last time I'd seen him at Thanksgiving, but he smiled when he saw me. A real smile. Not the kind my mother manufactured. Hey, he said, you didn't have to come. Yeah, I did. He shrugged. Probably. They've been making calls all week. I think they've scheduled half the family for testing. Testing. There it was, already in motion. My mother appeared behind me in the doorway. The transplant coordinator wants to speak with you, she said. I told her you'd be available this evening. I turned. You told her I'd be available? She tilted her head like I'd asked a silly question. You are available, aren't you? I didn't answer. I turned back to Caleb, squeezed his hand once, and walked out of the room. In the hallway, I found a chair near the window and sat down. I pulled out my phone and texted my friend Nora, a paralegal I'd known since college. She had a habit of being right about things I didn't want to hear. They want me to get tested as a kidney donor for Caleb, I typed. Her response came in under a minute. Are they asking or telling? I stared at the screen. I couldn't answer that honestly because in my family, there had never been a difference. Over the next 48 hours, I went through the preliminary screening, blood tests, tissue typing, a psychological evaluation that felt more like an interrogation. The transplant coordinator, a woman named Dr. Adebayo, was careful, methodical, kind. She explained every step. She asked me 3 separate times if I was making this decision freely. Each time I said yes. Each time something in my chest tightened. On the third day, I was sitting in the hospital cafeteria eating a granola bar when my mother appeared across the table. She sat down without invitation and placed a printed schedule in front of me. "This is the surgical timeline," she said. "If the results come back clean, we're looking at a November procedure." I glanced at the paper. My name was listed as confirmed donor. "The results aren't back yet," I said. "They will be." Her voice was flat, absolute. "You're a match. I know it." "How do you know it?" "Because I made sure of it." I looked up. Her expression didn't change. She said it the way someone says I booked the restaurant or I called the plumber. Casual. Certain. Like matching my body to her son's was a logistical task she had completed years ago. I didn't ask what she meant. Not then. I put the granola bar down, stood up, and left the cafeteria. My hands were shaking. I made it to the bathroom on the second floor before I locked the door and leaned against the wall. I didn't cry. I pressed both palms flat against the tile and breathed. That night, I called Nora. She said I made sure of it, I told her. About me being a match. Nora was quiet for a moment. "Elise, have you ever seen your original birth certificate?" "No. Why would I?" "Because normal parents don't talk about their children's organs like investment portfolios." The results came back 2 days later. Dr. Adebayo called me into her office. She closed the door, which she hadn't done before. "Your tissue typing results are in," she said. "You are a compatible donor for Caleb." I nodded. I expected that. "But there's something else." She folded her hands on the desk. "Your genetic markers don't align with either of your parents." "Not partially. Not at all." I stared at her. "You are not biologically related to Caleb Whitmore," she continued. "Or to Diane and Richard Whitmore." 7 words. I counted them later. I sat in that chair for what felt like a full minute without speaking. The room didn't spin. The ground didn't shift. It was more like a door opening in a house I'd always known had too many walls. A door that had been painted over, wallpapered, covered with a family portrait, but it was always there. I always felt the draft. "I'm adopted," I said. "Not a question." Dr. Adebayo didn't confirm or deny. "That's something you'd need to discuss with your family," she said carefully. "What I can tell you is that despite the lack of biological relation, you are still a viable donor based on blood and tissue compatibility. That happens sometimes. It's uncommon, but not impossible." "So they got lucky," I said. She didn't answer that. I walked out of her office and went straight to my car. I sat in the parking garage for 20 minutes. Engine off, hands on the wheel. I wasn't crying. I was calculating. Every birthday where the gifts were uneven. Every family photo where I stood slightly apart. Every time my father corrected someone who said I looked like him. "She takes after her mother's side," he'd say. Except I didn't. I didn't take after anyone's side. I was outside. I called Nora. "You were right," I said. "I know," she replied. "And I'm sorry. What do you want to do?" "I want to know why they adopted me." She paused. "You already know why." And I did. I just needed to hear myself say it. They adopted me because Caleb was born with a genetic condition that could one day require an organ transplant. They knew it early. They planned for it. And they found a baby me who happened to be a compatible blood type. O negative. Universal. Convenient. I wasn't their daughter. I was their insurance policy. I didn't go back to the hospital that day. I drove to a Starbucks on Haywood Road, ordered something I didn't taste, and started searching. Adoption records in North Carolina. How to access sealed birth certificates. Legal rights of adoptees. My phone became a flashlight in a room I'd been sitting in my whole life with the lights off. By evening, my mother had texted 4 times. The last one read, "Doctor, Adebayo says you left without completing intake. We need you back tomorrow. Don't be dramatic. Don't be dramatic." The family motto. The phrase that had been slapped across every genuine emotion I'd ever expressed like a muzzle. I didn't respond. The next morning, I returned to the hospital. Not for them, for Caleb. I walked past my mother in the lobby without a word, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and entered his room. He looked better today. A little color in his cheeks. He was reading something on his tablet and glanced up when I walked in. "Hey," he said. "Hey, did you know?" He frowned. "Know what? That I'm adopted?" The silence that followed was different from the one in Dr. Adebayo's office. This one was heavier. His face didn't show surprise. It showed something worse. Recognition. Yeah, he said quietly. I found out when I was 16. I overheard Mom on the phone with the adoption attorney. Something about sealed records and medical compatibility clauses. Medical compatibility clauses. I repeated the words slowly, letting each one land. He looked away. I wanted to tell you. I almost did, like 10 times. But Mom said if I told you, they'd send you away. I was 16, Elise. I believed her. I didn't yell at him. I didn't have the energy. I sat down in the chair beside his bed, and for a while, neither of us spoke. He reached for my hand. I let him take it. I'm sorry, he whispered. I know, but I need to ask you something, and I need the truth. Did you ever ask them to do this? To adopt a donor? His eyes filled. No. God? No. I didn't even understand what was happening until I was older. By then it was just the way things were. I believed him. Maybe I shouldn't have, but I did. Caleb was many things: sheltered, passive, compliant, but he wasn't cruel. He was just the other side of the same coin. He got the gold. I got the weight of carrying it. I left his room and went downstairs. My mother was in the consultation lounge with my father, who had finally appeared. He sat like a man who expected to be obeyed, simply by existing, legs crossed, arms folded, chin raised. He didn't greet me. Sit down, my mother said. I remained standing. Dr. Adebayo told us about the genetic results, she continued. It doesn't change anything. It changes everything. My father spoke for the first time. You're being selfish. As usual. I looked at him, the man who had never once asked me about my day, my dreams, my grades, my friends. The man who signed my birthday cards with just his first name. The man who once told me, at 14, that I should be grateful they kept me around. You adopted me to harvest my organs, I said. My mother flinched. That is a disgusting thing to say. Then explain the medical compatibility clause in my adoption file. She went white. Truly, genuinely white. Not like a performance. Not like the dramatic grief she usually wore. This was the real thing. The mask slipping. Who told you about that? She whispered. It doesn't matter. I know. And I have every right to refuse the donation. My father stood. If you refuse, he said slowly, you are no longer part of this family. I looked at him for a long time. Then I said the truest thing I'd ever said in that building. I never was. The days that followed were a blur of legal filings and quiet rage. Nora connected me with a family attorney named David Chen, who specialized in adoption fraud. Within a week, I had filed a request to unseal my adoption records. Within 2 weeks, the records confirmed what I already knew. My adoption had been facilitated through a private agency that matched families with children based on medical compatibility. The clause in my file was explicit. Donor, eligible infant, O negative, tissue type cross-referenced with existing dependent. I was selected the way you select a product from a catalog. Feature set, compatible kidneys. David also found something else. The agency had been shut down 9 years ago following an investigation into coercive adoption practices. 3 families had been flagged. The Whitmores were one of them. I didn't cry when I read that. I went for a run. 5 miles through the neighborhoods of downtown Charlotte, past the coffee shops and the dog parks, and the people living lives that didn't require legal teams to untangle. I ran until my lungs burned, and then I kept running, because the burning felt like something I had chosen. Meanwhile, my mother launched a campaign. She called relatives. She posted on Facebook. She told everyone I was abandoning my dying brother out of spite. She used the word ungrateful so many times it lost all meaning, like a bell rung until it cracks. My aunt called me. My uncle called me. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in 5 years sent me a text that read, "Family means sacrifice. Don't be that person." None of them asked for my side. None of them asked what I'd found. Then my mother did something I hadn't anticipated. She filed a petition with the court to declare me mentally incompetent. The argument that I was suffering from severe emotional distress that impaired my judgment, and that as my legal guardians, a term that had technically expired when I turned 18, they should be granted emergency medical power of attorney to authorize the transplant on my behalf. She stood in front of a judge and said I was incapable of making rational decisions. I was sitting in the gallery when she said it. I had driven to Asheville that morning after Nora intercepted the filing. I wore a gray blazer. I brought a folder. Inside that folder, the sealed adoption records, the agency investigation report, Dr. Adebayo's genetic results, the medical compatibility clause, and a signed affidavit from David Chen outlining the legal history. My mother didn't know I was there until the judge asked if the respondent was present. I stood up. She turned around. For 1 second, one honest, unguarded second, I saw her face. Not anger, not grief, fear. Your Honor, I said. My voice didn't shake. I have documentation showing that my adoption was arranged specifically to create a future organ donor for their biological son. I have genetic proof that I am not related to the petitioners. I have evidence of a medical compatibility clause written into my adoption file. And I have a report from a shuttered agency that was investigated for exactly this kind of practice. I opened the folder and handed it to the bailiff. My mother's attorney asked for a recess. The judge denied it. I continued. I am not mentally incompetent. I am not emotionally unstable. I am a 26-year-old woman who discovered 3 weeks ago that she was adopted under false pretenses and that her body was treated as collateral from birth. I am choosing not to donate my kidney. That is not a symptom. That is a decision. The courtroom was quiet. My father, who had submitted the notarized letter calling me volatile, was not present. He had not come. He never came when it mattered. The judge denied the petition in full. She also referred the case to the district attorney's office for further review of the adoption circumstances. My mother left the courthouse without speaking to me. She walked past me in the hallway like I was furniture. A reporter outside asked her for a comment. She said, "This is a family matter," and got into her car. I stood on the courthouse steps for a long time after that. The October air was sharp. Leaves were falling from the oaks lining the street, slow and golden, and completely indifferent to what had just happened inside. Nora called me that evening. "How do you feel?" I thought about it, like I just took off a coat I didn't know I was wearing. She laughed softly. "That's the most you thing you've ever said." 3 days later, I received a message from Caleb. Not a text, an email, long and carefully written. He told me he was on the transplant waitlist. A living donor had been identified through the National Registry, someone unrelated, someone who volunteered. He told me the surgery was scheduled for December. He told me he understood why I said no, and that he didn't blame me. And at the end, he wrote, "You were always my sister, not because of blood, not because of what you could give me, but because you showed up when no one asked you to, every single time. I'm sorry I didn't show up for you sooner." I read that email 4 times. Then I closed my laptop and went to bed. I didn't hear from my parents again. Not directly. Through relatives, through lawyers, through the occasional passive-aggressive Facebook post my cousin would screenshot and send me, I pieced together that my mother had told everyone I had fabricated the adoption story, that I was mentally ill, that I had always been difficult. None of it stuck. The court records were public. The agency report was public. The truth was louder than her now. In December, Caleb had his surgery. It went well. I sent flowers to the hospital. No card. He knew they were from me. In January, I legally changed my name. Not my first name, I kept Elise. That was mine, given to me before anyone had plans for my body. I changed my last name, dropped Whitmore, took my biological mother's surname, which I'd found in the unsealed records. Her name was Renata Linden. She had been 19 when she gave me up. She hadn't known about the compatibility clause. She thought she was giving her daughter a better life. Elise Linden. I said it out loud in the clerk's office, and it felt like putting on shoes that actually fit. That spring, I got a letter. No return address. Postmark from somewhere in Ohio. Inside, a single sheet of lined paper, handwritten, "Dear Elise, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I'm your birth mother. I saw what happened in the news. I've been looking for you since you were 3 days old. I never stopped. I just didn't know where to look. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know I didn't give you away because I didn't want you. I gave you away because I thought they would love you. I'm so sorry they didn't, but I did. I always did." I sat at my kitchen table in Charlotte, holding that letter, and for the first time in months, I cried. Not from pain, from relief, from the sudden, overwhelming knowledge that somewhere in this world, someone had wanted me. Not for my blood type, not for my kidneys, not for what I could give, just for me. I folded the letter and placed it in a box in my desk drawer. Not in the folder labeled evidence, in the one labeled beginnings, because that's what this was now. Not an ending, not revenge, not justice. Even though justice had been served, it was simpler than all of that. It was a woman finally learning that her life was her own, that her body was not a debt, that silence doesn't mean agreement, and that the people who were supposed to protect you don't always deserve the power you gave them. Some families are built on love. Mine was built on a transaction. But I am no longer the product. I am the person who walked away from the catalog and wrote her own name on the door. And if you're listening to this, and you've ever felt like you existed for someone else's convenience, you don't. You never did. Your life is yours. And the first time you say no might be the first time you actually mean yes to yourself. Thank you for listening. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment. Tell me your story. And don't forget to like and subscribe to DR Revenge Story for more true emotional stories like this one. You're not alone, and your voice matters.